across the state about strengthening our connections and supporting one another. We know that internet service providers, or ISPs, are essential for our daily connectivity, especially when expanding services to rural areas. Whether it's regular service or emergency response, we'll discuss their roles and invite your questions afterwards. So for today's agenda, we will first talk about IEI and Band and C and who we are, and then we'll talk to our local ISPs who are bridging the digital divide, and then we'll have some Q&A. So our goal at Band and C is to provide technical assistance and planning capacity for local level digital inclusion planning efforts. But we know that these plans can be changed entirely within an event like Helene. Our Western North Carolina digital inclusion partners, led by our partners at the Councils of Regional Governments and Dogwood Health Trust, have seen significant changes since Helene. But in addition to continuing our support for those partners in the West, our team has been focusing on Central and Eastern North Carolina through kickoff events and planning resources. We are so grateful to those on the call who have contributed to this effort, and please introduce yourself in the chat. Our team hosted a training session 2 weeks ago with Together WNC and Resources for Resilience, aimed at helping partners like us understand the trauma and recovery processes many of our colleagues are experiencing. We share more opportunities like this webinar and other initiatives in our connected newsletter, so be sure to register, and that will be in the chat. So some of you might be joining our Digital Opportunities Gathering last June in the mountains, and we're so excited to continue it as an annual gathering with the North Carolina Department of Information Technology. Our free conference will bring together hundreds of North Carolina digital leaders on Monday, April 28th at Houghton Library at NC State in Raleigh, and we hope you can register today. We have an incredible lineup of speakers, breakout sessions, and networking opportunities. If you're involved in broadband, the digital divide, or digital skills sectors, you don't want to miss this event. Be sure to register as soon as possible and share it with your networks. We had a wait list last June, so it's expected to fill up. We also offer a limited number of travel reimbursements for those who need financial assistance to attend, especially if your employer can't cover your travel costs. So let's get started with today's guests. We're truly honored to have our panel of service providers from North Carolina with us today. We'll share a more detailed bio in our chat and with a follow-up email. We'll start with Marshall Cherry. He's a native of Bertie County and has dedicated over 30 years of service to Roanoke Cooperative, starting his career there in 1993. He has been president and CEO since December 2021, following his role as chief operating officer from 2014.
Listen, it's not how it looks. I'm still a guy.
Oh, sorry about that. James Nestor is with has broad industry experience, MCNC and eNCore's chief marketing officer. He has an extensive track record of uncovering opportunities, challenging what is known, innovating to forge the next, and building consensus and collaboration across diverse stakeholders throughout the process. Thanks for joining us, James. Ken Griffin is the Chief Executive Officer of PANGAEA Internet, bringing over 30 years of experience in information technology management. Hi, Ken. And of course, Brian Rathbone. He spent much of his 35-year technology career in the private sector, building networks and software platforms for mid-sized companies, manufacturers, .coms, and NASCAR teams. Rathbone was a driving force, speaking of NASCAR, behind the development of the North Carolina open source broadband map and created the original prototype. Broadband Catalyst works with nonprofits, NGOs, CDFIs, and ISPs to foster the expansion of broadband infrastructure, device access, and digital skills across the United States and Canada. Hi, Brian. Donald Richardson is the general manager of Greenlight Community Broadband. He's been with the city of Wilson and Greenlight since 2007. In his role, Donald manages and oversees all operations related to Greenlight and information technology. He also supervises the United Communications Center. Hi, Donald. Well, thank you all so much for being here. We'll have time for questions after, but as people are talking, please ask questions in the chat and we'll get to them as best we can. If we can't, we'll try to answer them in our follow-up email. So we'll start with a broad overview of the role of ISPs in North Carolina. It's a varied landscape with nationwide corporations and small cooperatives. Brian Rathbone with Broadband Catalyst is one of our closest partners in the digital inclusion space. With his talent and compassion, He makes the technology and challenging part of broadband technology accessible to everyone he talks to. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Samantha. Thank you so much for your kind words. It is a pleasure to be here. Good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to see some familiar names in the chat and some new names. So I hope you're all doing well. Again, I spent 4 years at the state broadband office. That's where I gained a lot of the experience. I was technical assistance director for 31 counties in Western North Carolina. So that's the area I'm most familiar with, but I did statewide work on the mapping and everything as well. And what I want to do is I want to keep my remarks as short as possible, but get some good information in. And I really want to hear from our ISP panelists, so I'm not going to belabor the point. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about what the different technologies that we use to deliver internet are and how they relate to this discussion. So this slide shows the technology codes that the FCC uses to report different types of internet service. And I'm just going to breeze through these really quickly to talk about what they are, how they relate to the landscape, how they relate to the challenges that we have in North Carolina as far as getting broadband to everybody. So the first four codes that you see, 10, 11, 12, and 20, are all DSL codes. And DSL is broadband that, or at least internet access, it's not always broadband speeds, that's delivered to the residents or the business using copper phone wires. So it's a pair of copper wires, the same pair of copper wires that's used to bring landline voice communications into a structure can be used to bring internet access. It's very distance sensitive. The longer you go over that copper connection, the slower the connection gets. And once you get about 3 miles of copper, it stops working. So that's one of the challenges we've had with DSL over the years, is just if you're too far out on the copper portion before you get to fiber, it stops working. It gets very slow. It's unreliable. And the truth of the matter is large DSL providers, AT&T in particular, are starting to abandon their DSL infrastructure, or at least not install new customers. So it's not as applicable as it was in the past. Number 30, other wireline copper wire technologies other than DSL, such as Ethernet over copper and T1. When I bought this house and I didn't have internet access, I spent 7 years on a fractional T1 where I spent $700 a month for less than 1 megabit service. It's available everywhere, but it's expensive. So glad I'm not on that anymore. Type 40, 41, 42, and 43. These are your cable systems, what's known as DOCSIS, data over cable. So back in the old days when we hooked up coaxial cable to our homes and businesses to get cable television, we've since retrofitted that infrastructure to provide broadband access. It tends to be a little bit cheaper to deploy if the coax is already connected to the structures. The providers are bringing their fiber. Cable modems, it's a hybrid fiber cable. All of these types of internet access at some point or another get to fiber. So it's that coaxial cable that is the last mile from cable modems. One of the biggest challenges we have in the cable modem or cable internet industry is going to be common with fiber, is that when the housing density gets low and everybody's spread out and everybody has long driveways like out in the rural areas, it gets a lot more expensive to hook up homes that already don't have that connection to them. So type 50, optical carrier, fiber, otherwise known as fiber to the home or fiber to the premise. This is the gold standard as far as future-proofing, speed, latency, but it comes at a high cost. The biggest challenge we have with getting fiber networks out to everybody, that's what I'm on now. I'm thrilled to have it, but it was expensive to hook me up because I'm 700 feet from the road. And these are the challenges that the providers that we have, we'll talk next, these are the challenges they face in rural areas. Low density, terrain, topography, and long driveways all elevate the cost of deploying broadband. When we get to satellite in type 60, and I see I'm missing one code, so I'm going to break this out into two different codes. 60 satellite was geosynchronous satellite. This is the older type of satellite, HughesNet, and some of these other networks where the satellite's always in the same place in the sky, but it's about 20,000 miles from Earth. And the amount of time it takes for every request to go 20,000 miles and back, so a 40,000 mile round trip, adds a lot of latency. It's not very responsive. And so that hasn't traditionally been considered true broadband because the latency is so high. What you probably hear a lot about these days are low Earth orbit satellites, where those satellites are much closer to the planet. They're about 300 miles up. But because they're that close to the planet, if they weren't moving at high speed, they would crash back to Earth. So we end up with arrays of satellites, hundreds of satellites going around the planet in an elliptical orbit. And there's always one coming over you. If you're a subscriber, I've used low Earth orbit satellite. One of the things I found was my signal strength kind of did a waveform. When the satellite was close overhead, it was really good. And as it got closer to the horizon and the next one was coming and I had to hand off to it, those were the issues I tended to have with low Earth orbit satellite. What you're going to see is a lot of availability, but it also is some of the more expensive service to install and to use, and the performance is definitely lower than terrestrial service, at least from my experience. Then we get into terrestrial fixed wireless. And this is basically when you have a radio on the side of your house that points to a tower that has radios on it. Your house doesn't move, the tower doesn't move. That's what makes it fixed, as opposed to, say, your mobile phone that you can drive down the road and go from tower to tower and communicate through various towers. Fixed wireless, you're always going to be communicating with the same tower. In the past, most of what we used was unlicensed fixed wireless. And the biggest challenge that we had with that was it just wouldn't go through trees. You could really easily block it with leaves. And so that's been a challenge. We deployed that here in Rutherford County, and it just did not get to enough people because so many people had trees. Type 71 licensed, this is where you tend to have organizations that have paid lots of money for an exclusive license to have exclusive access to a set of frequencies. This includes companies like AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and a lot of our smaller fixed wireless providers who are using CBRS, Citizen Band Radio Service, with priority access licenses. What that basically means is that others can't come in and interfere with them, so the service tends to be more reliable, and it can go through trees better. It's not impervious to trees. Eventually, there will be enough trees in the way that the service will be blocked, but you can get through enough trees that it's a much bigger improvement over unlicensed fixed wireless. And then the licensed by rule, that's essentially the CBRS, that same Citizens Band Radio service. There's two portions of it. Generally available, GAA, where you can use it with no license whatsoever, but it's kind of a first come, first serve, and eventually you will run out of spectrum. And then you can pair priority access licenses with them. We see that quite a bit in different parts of North Carolina, where we're putting in this fixed wireless service that can go through trees to a certain extent. The licenses for CBRS are much lower cost than, say, what T-Mobile or AT&T have spent on their spectrum. So it's more widely available, and it's great for filling gaps. And then the electric over power line, this is a technology that did not fare very well. I don't expect to see more broadband over power line, but it's still reported to the FCC. And there are other types that are less common that are type 0. So I know I brushed over that fairly quickly. Next slide, please. I went into more depth in a video that I'm going to reference here in a moment, but I wanted to talk just a little bit about how challenging it is to deploy wireline service, be it fiber or cable in particular, in rural areas. When BSLs are broadband serviceable locations, that's how the FCC counts potential customers for a broadband network in any given region now. And it includes residences, businesses, community anchor institutions, government agencies, those sorts of things. So if you happen to be in a dense area like in town, and you can drive a mile of road and you're going to pass more than 15 potential customers for a network, in general, the private sector can make that business case on their own, and it usually costs, in the area of $1,500. There's lots of factors that can change these costs, so these are just kind of thumbnail estimates. But it's somewhere around $1,500 per location when they're fairly dense. But when you get into the suburbs and now you drive a mile of road and you might only pass between 3 and 15 households per mile, costs can exceed $5,000 per location. And if you look at the data from North Carolina as we've deployed our grant funds so far, the average cost to connect a location has been $4,900. So we've kind of hit a lot of that suburban area, but we're starting to tap into the really rural areas like where I live, where you might only pass 3 locations per mile. And the cost can exceed $25,000 per location, which is at which point we start looking at alternate technologies. You require a lot more subsidy and a lot better business case to support $25,000 a location, one, to put it in, 2, to maintain it and support it if ever gets damaged and needs to be replaced. Next slide, please. So as I said, I wanted to keep my portion fairly quick. I have created this video with LISC, Lead for America. Thank our friends at River Street Networks for letting us use their recording studio to record this and get a little more production value. That's going to be available. There will be a link in the chat. If you just want a little bit deeper dive on these different types of internet and how that works, I recommend watching this video. And I really look forward to hearing from our ISP panelists because they represent an interesting slice of the market. We've got nonprofit networks here today. We've got an electrical co-op that has formed a for-profit subsidiary that can go outside of their electrical co-op territory. And we've got a municipal network here today. And I'm particularly intrigued by these business models because they can stretch out the return on investment requirement farther than the private sector or publicly traded networks that generally need to get their money back within 3 to 5 years in order to not lose money. These networks can stretch that investment out, which allows them to go into more challenging areas. So I'm going to keep my remarks short. I'll look forward to talking more in the question and answer session. And again, I'm Brian with Broadband Catalyst. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Brian. All right, now let's explore what this looks like in practice with some of our community ISPs. We'll learn more about their operations, their projects, partnerships, and solutions to meeting community needs. First, we'll start with Marshall with Roanoke Cooperative. Hi, Marshall.
Hello. Well, good morning again, everyone, and thank you so much for this opportunity. And certainly, Brian has really set the stage here today regarding the technologies. So I certainly appreciate his comments. For everyone, I am Marshall Cherry, CEO of Roanoke Cooperative. We're one of the 26 electric cooperatives in North Carolina. And of course, we're located, as you can see on the map, in northeastern North Carolina. We do have our challenges in terms of delivering the service known as electricity. Particularly, I mean, of course, we're a very reliable system. Affordability is somewhat of a challenge at times due to the fact that we're one of the most economically distressed regions of America. And in North Carolina, we actually have the lowest density of meters for every mile of investment, actually right at about 6. And of course, we're the only electric cooperative in the state of North Carolina that experienced no growth within the past 10 years, which has really been a challenge for the past 20 to 30 years here in the region due to the outmigration of talent and individuals. And so with that, a part of our growth strategy, and of course, being a part of the solutions, you'll see several of the things that we're working on here to address the challenges that we do face. But I do want to lift up the work that we're doing around our broadband subsidiary 5, whereas we've taken on their commitment to deliver high-speed connectivity to our membership and some areas outside of our service territory. And of course, the goal in mind is to have passings to all of our member owners available by the end of the first quarter of next year. This actually is on the heels of about an 11-year, let's just say, vision. About 11 years ago, we kind of took on this concept after actually MCNC built out a fiber network across the state of North Carolina, and you'll hear from a colleague of mine here shortly. And with that, we made the decision to build out our own fiber ring to bring some benefits to our electric system. And in doing so, we were really planning to provide middle mile services to a partner who could deliver last mile services to our membership. After we weren't successful there, we actually took on the effort ourselves to build out, due to demand, In the beginning, you heard Brian talk about some of the solutions. One of our solutions that we did take on early on was fixed wireless, due to the fact that it is much cheaper than delivering fiber. But we did learn, just as Brian just stated, the issues that come with latency around trees. We have a lot of trees here in Northeastern North Carolina. It was costing us more to maintain the system than the savings we thought we were going to achieve with the original investment. So in 2021, we made the decision to invest in the gold standard, which is fiber. And we're actually amid a fiber to the home build out to our membership. And in doing so, to date, we're right at about a little more than the 6,000 that you see here. We're right at about maybe 6,400. 4,300 of those would be member owners of Roanoke. And in order for us to actually pass our membership, we had to go in some of these outside areas where we could get density, because 6 meters per mile of line certainly is not a business case to take on a fiber investment. We're very grateful to the membership and their support, in the fact that almost 1 out of every 2 that we've passed about 9,000 of our member owners to date, and about 1 out of every 2 of our member owners are actually subscribing to the service. And then, of course, we're again in some of these cities. Elizabeth City, North Carolina, we're in Edenton, North Carolina, we're in Windsor, North Carolina. And so the passing certainly will help us support. And then in addition to that, we've been able to garner some grant dollars. We would love to have been able to achieve more, but certainly we're taking on, the investment, and we're delivering the service. And to date, again, you've heard the numbers, but it's our goal this year to partner, and you're going to hear from a colleague of mine here very shortly, to assist and of course collaborate on the expansion work that we're continuing to do to help us fulfill the commitment that we've established for our membership, to ensure that everyone has the service available to them, because we're getting now into some of these areas that are less dense in our service territory. And so we're trying to get to the 2 and 3 meters per mile of line now in serving our membership. And so in order to do that, we're taking on a collaboration with MCNC through an entity that Jim Nestor is going to talk about here shortly, that will allow us to continue to work to expand. But in addition to that, make sure that digital inclusion is available in the same manner that we're ensuring that it's available to our membership across the state of North Carolina. We certainly see opportunities to continue to do so. So with that, I'll wrap up my comments, and I certainly look forward to passing the torch to Jim, who will talk more about the expansion work that we're going to take on together. Jim?
Well, thank you, Marshall. Good morning, everybody. I'm Jim Nestor, the Chief Marketing Officer for MCNC and eNCore. It's great to be a part of this discussion today. I am joined by my colleague at MCNC and eNCore, Phil Emer, who many of you may know. He is the Chief Business Development Officer for eNCore. He may chime in when we get to the Q&A session here. I think it's been made very clear, we're all very much aware of the transformative power of broadband. It could truly change the lives of so many in North Carolina. But to further on something Marshall was saying, this is about more than technology, right? This is a quality of life issue, and it's a quality of opportunity issue, right? That's what drove us to create eNCore. Our approach is much more than just the technology. North Carolina's broadband challenges require bold strategies. eNCore was formed as a shared call to action to remedy technological inequities that have kept so many North Carolina citizens from reaching their full potential. The approach is about addressing those inequities where eNCore provides a key differentiator. So on this slide here, let's talk about who is or what is eNCore. eNCore is the collaboration between MCNC and FIBE, right? Collaborating with public utilities, EMCs, TMCs to bring much needed broadband and modernize grid operations. In this collaboration, FIBE, which is a subsidiary of Roanoke Cooperative, they're the service provider that will be delivering the broadband to residences and businesses. MCNC is the middle mile fiber provider. Hopefully many of you are familiar with MCNC. We manage the North Carolina Research and Education Network, nearly 5,000 miles of fiber across North Carolina. eNCore then owns, plans, develops, instructs, maintains, and operates the fiber networks, providing that affordable, high-performance connectivity. affordability there is key to hit on something Brian said, right? Affordability is sustainability. So when we talk about sustainability as it relates to broadband infrastructure and opportunities in North Carolina, we have to recognize that affordability provides for that sustainability. This collaboration, as we're seeking nonprofit status, was formed nearly a year ago. It's tasked with bridging the digital divide for residents and business communities throughout rural North Carolina. We think it's all about providing next generation connectivity, high speed access to all modern resources needed to participate in today's digital economy. As a nonprofit, eNCore and its member organizations are going to be providing essential broadband infrastructure and services to empower businesses and individuals to ensure that no community is left behind. It's all about community-driven, scalable models, such as eNCore, that encourage participation from all levels in order to drive the economy in North Carolina to new heights. Next slide, please. As we talk about eNCore, as we go across the state, we're doing a lot of outreach to EMCs, TMCs. We're talking about things that the EMCs and the TMCs and communities are talking about. We're talking about purpose-built fiber, utilities of the future, operational improvements, public Wi-Fi, and perhaps most importantly for many of these communities and many of these providers, cost management, right? When we talk about partnership opportunities with the EMCs and TMCs and others, we're talking about the contribution on their part being in the form of pole attachments or permitting assistance or make-ready work, marketing support, or warehousing opportunities, right? In return, we're looking at the design and construction, we're providing fiber, we're providing those OEM things. And so we're effectively working with them to maximize the efficiency of their operations. And we're starting where the problem exists, those most in need. Point that Brian and Marshall both hit on. We're starting at those areas where it is the most difficult to get to, right? We call these the overlooked communities because, as Brian pointed out, you know, the economics aren't there for other providers to get to those one or two households over a long period of long space there. So we're starting where that problem is, addressing those needs first. Next slide. You know, as we talk today, it's clear that no one entity can do this by themselves. So it's great to see all these various providers in different forms here today. We believe that this is very much a shared story that we all contribute to, and we look forward to working with those on this call and others across the state to address this issue. Even though eNCore is in its nascent stages, its overarching vision is comprehensive, and we're looking to be a pivotal contributor to economic development in these rural and underserved communities throughout North Carolina, both this year and in years to come. This is a really exciting time for our state. As a nonprofit, we're going to be providing that essential broadband infrastructure to empower businesses and individuals to ensure that no community is left behind. And so that's who eNCore is. That's what we're doing. We're looking forward to working with folks on this webinar today and others across the state. That's us in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, James. This is really interesting to hear about and learn more about this new collaboration. Next, we will hear from Ken Griffin with PANGAEA.
Good morning. Thanks. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to give any earth-shattering information that the other guys haven't already provided. So I'll just kind of cover a brief overview of what PANGAEA is, because we're a different type of company. We're a very proud company, but we're actually a 501c3 not-for-profit. I guess we differ a little bit from Marshall in that we don't own poles. You know, we don't own the infrastructure necessarily to make it to the remote areas, but that's really why we were established. We're a 501c3 not-for-profit. We serve Polk and Rutherford counties in western North Carolina, and we have about 700 miles of fiber, mostly within those two counties. We're very community focused and driven. We're passionate about the local impact that we can provide in meeting the unique needs of our area. We're really formed to address the local needs. We work very closely with economic development agencies within our areas. We were actually created in 2002, incorporated as a nonprofit in 2003, really to be able to interconnect the government agencies and the schools within our areas. So public partnerships, public and private partnerships are instrumental in what PANGAEA does. They are what formed us. So basically we collaborate with all the public and private schools in Polk and Rutherford County, all the hospital locations, and many other healthcare providers, all the fire departments and emergency services, the county and municipal governments within the areas, local foundations, which have been instrumental in our funding and startup. And since COVID came about, with residential providers, not only residential providers, but residential customers. We were established to provide business class service, 100% dedicated fiber, basically to each entity that we would serve. But when COVID came about and the services within our area were very, as Brian can attest, Brian lives in our area, by the way, it's challenging. And there's not a lot of opportunities for other providers to provide services without, government covering a lot of those funds, if you will, for the remote locations. We're fortunate in that we are in most of those remote locations because we provided services to the fire departments and the schools. So in Polk and Rutherford County, those tend to be, think of them as fingers out into the remote communities. So we were there. So we worked with the schools and everyone to kind of begin to provide some type of residential type service. We'd always viewed ourselves as a provider that would work with residential providers to meet the needs of the community. And we tried to recruit providers. We worked very diligently for years with that. And we had some success. We had some residential providers that were coming into areas that maybe supply up to, 6,000 households in Polk and Rutherford County. But obviously that is still a profit-driven business opportunity for them. So when it gets to the very remote areas, some of the challenging areas where they could not reach it with wireless technology because, it's on one hillside and you need to shoot through another one, it wasn't very successful. So at that point, when COVID came about, we said, if you're near our fiber and we can help you, we will. So at that point, you no longer had to be a business. We would work with you in any way that we could. Our leadership team is made up of our staff, for instance. We live in these areas. This is our community that we're serving. Our board is actually made up of the county managers from both our county. Polk and Rutherford County managers sit on our board, and other business leaders in the community. Our technology teams are made up of representatives from the school systems and the municipal governments, and again, other community leaders, business leaders from the community. We partnered with many of the other agencies around here, such as MCNC. They've been a major supporter of PANGAEA. We're very appreciative of those guys for many years, not to mention several others that we won't name at this point, but our staff, again, we live in the areas that we provide service to. So if we're providing service to a restaurant, we're also the ones that are eating in those restaurants. We are the neighbors. We attend the same churches that we provide service to, can send our kids to the same schools, and we rely upon the same emergency services infrastructure, to the fire departments and hospitals that we provide. So you're really not going to get someone that's more invested in our local community than what we are. We're extremely passionate about that. It is our personal investment in the community. Our uptime, we're extremely proud about that. It's about 99.999%. We refer to that as the 5 nines. We work very diligently with that because our network was constructed with that in mind. It's really difficult if fire department goes down. So what we tried to do is build a lot of rings with our network so that if one area goes down, we can automatically route through a different path to protect it. Now, that's not to say that every path we have in every fire department, every school is protected, but there's cost constraints associated with most of that we'll touch on in a minute, but that's what we try to do. For instance, during COVID, we had very little uptime. We'll knock on wood. We're very proud of that. We continue to recover from Hurricane Helene. And we continue to go through recovery efforts with it, but within a matter of a couple of days, we pretty much had about 90% of our network restored. Again, that was because our staff were the ones that were living in the community. We were the ones out cutting the trees out of the road, getting them off the utility infrastructure and making things happen. Other providers that weren't local, for instance, it took them weeks to come back to our area. Some of the challenges that we face, Brian mentioned the geography and the terrain. Everything kind of comes down to cost for us. We're having to ask to be on a pole to provide service. It's an aerial service. If it's underground, we're having to pay the contractors to install that. It gets extremely expensive when you're talking about boring through rock because you can't always trench. There's also pole attachment concerns with the costs with a provider, particularly if you're going into residential areas and the more remote areas, because the poles don't necessarily have height that we can attach to those poles without having to pay for some type of upfit. Or if there's a legacy provider there, it may be only providing copper type service, whether it's just the typical phone service. We typically have to pay those guys to move or make room for us on those poles. So it gets expensive. There's permitting concerns because particularly now with a lot of government funding coming into the area, we ask to be on a certain pole line that goes into an area that we haven't typically been in. We've seen it take upwards of 9 months now to receive approval for attaching to those poles. It's really hard to plan for expansion when you're having to wait for a year to move into an area. We do have higher infrastructure costs. We're not a mass market product. That is a far superior product, what we provide by being a dedicated fiber strand, but we're not set up to provide hundreds of thousands of households. That's not our market. Our market is dedicated fiber, extremely high reliability, extremely good service, provided and supported by local folks within our community. There is a lack of existing infrastructure in most of the areas. And by that, I mean, if we're looking at building down a particular path to reach a new neighborhood or an area, the pole line may not be there, or it may go through, since we're talking about rural area, it maybe go through several pastures. As Brian mentioned earlier, it's very challenging, particularly if the houses aren't built near those infrastructures. We're not even talking about the right-of-way concerns, because typically, if we're traveling by the road, that's one thing. But if anytime that you're passing over private property, we have to acquire a right of way. That can be really expensive. Or to be frank about it, a lot of folks within our area do not want you passing through their property to go to someone else. So it's a challenge. And obviously it all comes down to affordability. If it costs $25,000 per household to supply service to someone, 100% of the time, that's going to fail unless there's some type of subsidy. Our company is uniquely qualified in that we are a nonprofit. We're passionate about providing services, but we have to make sure their operational costs are covered. If there's 144 strand fiber that supplies a neighborhood of 10 folks and it's 2 miles to reach that neighborhood, if there's a tree issue and it causes the fiber to be cut, maybe the fiber is very resilient, so it's not damaged initially while the tree comes down, but the fire department comes along, needs to clear the road, they cut the fiber. It's very expensive for us to use local contractors to splice all that fiber back together, particularly for 10 households. Carrying costs are a major concern. It's not simply building the fiber to those areas, it's maintaining the fiber for the long run. So funding, obviously, because you have the fiber build out, you have data center construction, you have resiliency that we're having to build into it. It's a challenge in general. We have worked hard for many years trying to bring other providers into the area to provide residential service. We thought of ourselves as a middle mile provider initially. That wasn't successful at bringing other providers in. So we had to divert and begin to provide local services because no one else would. But that also illustrates how passionate we are and why it's very unique to have a local agency that's willing to do that, hoping to break in, hoping to just cover the operating costs and not necessarily try to use that to expand or, conquer other areas. So I hope you can tell I'm very passionate about this. Yeah. All of our staff are extremely passionate about providing services within our area. There's no one else that calls our area home. There's other providers in the area, but they're not personally invested in it like we are. So we're different. We're unique.
Thank you, Ken. That is, yeah, it's a great perspective to hear from someone in the community who's facing direct challenges that you'll see when you're just driving down the road because you're there and you know what it's going to take to overcome those challenges. Our last panelist that we want to hear from real quick is Donald Richardson from Greenlight in Wilson. Hi, Donald.
Hello, Donald Richardson with the City of Wilson Greenlight here in Wilson, North Carolina. Just to tell you guys a little bit about our organization, you know, we're Greenlight Community Broadband. We're a municipal-owned fiber to the home network. We are a department within the City of Wilson, much like electric, water, and gas. We are considered an enterprise department. Our goal is to provide underserved and unserved areas within the Wilson County or the City of Wilson with an alternative to traditional internet providers, offering faster speeds and often better customer service. We have initiatives set up to promote digital equity, ensuring that all residents have access to high-speed internet regardless of their income level or location. Much like Brian said, you know, being 700 feet off the road, if you live within the City of Wilson, we will get you services. You won't be paying any additional costs for the bills. It's just part of our initiative. Our fiber optic network typically delivers speeds that are far faster than traditional DSL cable services, making it especially useful for streaming, gaming, IoT devices, working from home. I come from a traditional cable company where you were actually rate limited and they throttled your services. Here, if you're paying for 6 gig, more than likely you're going to get 6 gig depending on your area. If you have multiple 6 gig customers, obviously you won't get the 6, but you'll get close to it. Some of the benefits of Greenlight Community Broadband, we have faster internet services, affordable pricing. We pride ourselves on providing excellent customer service, reliability and stability, digital inclusion, economic growth, and long-term investment on infrastructure. Faster speeds, like I said, right now we offer 1 gig services, internet only. We offer a 1 gig with Wi-Fi services. So you'll have 1 gig and you'll get guaranteed Wi-Fi connection. If you have an issue with your Wi-Fi, it won't be where you call in the Greenlight and we say, go buy another router. So if you're paying for that middle tier, we'll come out and make sure that if you're connected, you're working. And then our top tier is it's a multi-gig up to 6 gig symmetrical. So that could be 6 meg up and down to your home. Our affordable pricing, that 1 gig service I was telling you about, is $39.95, internet only. You know, you have to purchase your own router if you want Wi-Fi. Our middle tier is $59.95. That's 1 gig with all the services included. And then the multi-gig is a 6 gig for $99.95. In my 17 years, we have yet to go up on pricing for internet. We've actually lowered our pricing and increased the bandwidth. When I initially started, we started out with 10 meg symmetrical. And at that time, the incumbents were saying, you know, who's going to use 10 meg? And now we're offering 6 gig.
Yeah.
You know, our customer service here in Wilson with Greenlight, you get someone local. So if you're calling, you could be talking to your neighbor, you could be talking to a family member, someone here from the community here to support you. It's not where you're going to get passed around from one customer service rep to the technical service rep. Some of the customers even get me, you know, if it goes up the ladder far enough, I'll get in and help it with a video problem because I used to be the head and engineer tech responsible for all video. Reliability and stability, fiber to the home. Coming from a traditional cable TV company, the outages and the thunderstorms during the summer, I do not worry about them. The only thing we really worry about, you know, obviously hurricanes and squirrel chews. Most of our outages come from squirrels deciding that glass tastes good for some reason. Or it's actually I guess the coating inside the glass, they go and they chew on it, which creates outages. Excuse me, had COVID last week. So the digital inclusion, if you, at traditional cable companies, at least where I've come from, if you live X amount of feet off the road, you may not get services unless you pay for that infrastructure to go to your home. Here, you know, if you're within city limits, we will build to you. If we move to an area outside of the city into the county and you're within our footprint, we'll build to you. We offer classes now at one of our new, I guess, divisions within the Greenlight. It's a co-working space called the Exchange. So we offer training to the elderly, we offer training to the youth, We do some coding programs with partnerships with the Y. We're doing a lot to try to include everyone in this new digital age, let them know how to use technology and trying to help them for the future. And the long-term investment on infrastructure, as you know, fiber, we've gone from, like I said, that 10 meg to up to 6 gig in 17 years. I can only imagine where it's going. I never thought I'd see a day where we're offering multi-gig to residential homes. I never thought I'd see the day where we needed it, but it is something that has happened in my lifetime that I thought I would never see. And in summary, Greenlight community broadbands offer many advantages, from faster, more affordable internet to stronger community empowerment and support for the city of Wilson.
Thank you, Donald. That may be the first time I've heard a squirrel being a challenge, but I'm sure everyone's has heard it before, but seen it before. So thank you all so much. And now we're going to kick it off with some Q&A, with some questions we have, and then we'll open it up at the end for questions from the chat. If we have time, then folks on the call can unmute themselves and ask questions directly. So we'll start with Ken and Brian, living in West North Carolina. You all been dealing with Hurricane Helene's upend of service and support for months now. So what is recovery looking like now as we're about 6 months out? And what is needed to prepare for future events?
Well, if you don't mind me starting off, I'll first say that when I deployed the last mile fiber, building out to where PANGAEA's fiber is, I deployed rodent-proof fiber because we do have big squirrel issues with eating fiber. So yeah, that's definitely a problem that you have to look at. And while my family was fortunate during Helene that we had damage, but no trees fell on our houses, our cars, or our family members. My neighbors were not so fortunate. But I can say that in all my time as a broadband planner, I've always said that residential broadband communications are public safety communications. And I was both correct and I was wrong. When we went through Helene, the trees took down the aerial fiber. There was nothing to be done about that except wait for the power crews to come in, restore power before the fiber provider could go out and do their work and get the fiber back. So we had a period where we did not have our fiber internet. So during that time, I was relying largely on LEO satellite, Starlink connection, and for voice communications, the cellular networks using LTE. The LTE 5G worked for about 2 days, and I'm assuming that's when the generator ran out of fuel. And so then we ended up on 4G. I could go out to my truck and I could turn my booster on and I could get just enough to send text messaging. That was one of the biggest lessons I learned. Text messaging is public safety communications. Yes, and I've been known to point out the weaknesses of low Earth orbit satellite. But you want to talk about an amazing upgrade to text messaging direct from satellite to phone. Starlink, LEO, Kuiper, these other networks, they're fantastic for backup service, for mobile service, for emergency communications. We do have capacity issues that we found that we deploy a lot of LEO satellite in Western North Carolina during Helene's the initial recovery. The network really suffered for it. It didn't have the capacity to support that much. So it's a trade-off. It's a mixed bag. But as far as that public safety communications, it can be absolutely wonderful. The other thing that we learned during Helene, and we've said for a long time that, buried fiber is generally more reliable than aerial fiber. But we found that, one, it's not immune to floods and other types of damage. And when it does get damaged, it's harder to replace. It's harder to fix. So in the places that we did lose a lot of our middle mile buried infrastructure, we saw the aerial infrastructure actually get restored more quickly. Both were vulnerable at different levels to different types of threats. So it's been a real learning experience for us. We have to use all of our different communications methodologies and modalities to serve public safety communications during disasters. And I think our biggest thing that we need to do, I'm working with the Rural Center Collaborative Broadband Initiative, Dogwood Health Trust, talking with the Broadband Office and others at the state about recovery. We need to get more resiliency in our middle mile so that doesn't take out all of the last mile. And we need to get generators to cell towers. We need to have backup power, backup routes. As Ken mentioned, we need rings. I'm suggesting that we have some point-to-point wireless that we can put in place temporarily. We need portable infrastructure, generators, things like that, that can be mobilized when the need arises, because it's too expensive to just harden every single site in the state. So part of what I think we need to do is have mobile infrastructure that can be deployed to where it needs to be when there's a disaster. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. That was really helpful. Ken, do you have anything to add?
Yes, ma'am. So Brian's right. And for instance, with the damage that we incurred, we received power at our last data center last week. It's the first time it was restored in Lake Lure.
Wow.
So, we've had lots of areas that were, received total devastation. Lots of areas, the majority of it was mainly for tree damage. The majority of our fiber is aerial. And typically when trees come down the lines, we don't necessarily lose service. Again, the fiber it's a tough product, really. It's glass tubes, but it's still very resilient until someone comes along to clean it out of the road or to clean the tree. And so we would continually fight that battle. We still fight the battle as much of the cleanup continues to occur. But we would restore service, for instance, between Rutherfordton and Lake Lure, I think at least 4 different times after splicing all of our fiber back together along those paths, someone would come along with some tree work or follow up with cleanup and cut the fiber again. So, now there's very large trucks that go along, again, aerial fiber. Some of them are overloaded. They're beyond spec as far as height goes. They're snag our fiber now and bring it down. We work very diligently to restore service as quickly as possible because we had to get it back to the fire departments and the 911 call centers, all the government locations, because the cell service was gone. So folks had to have internet in order to connect with Wi-Fi on their cell phones to be able to make the calls, because we were literally living on islands for many weeks. And by an island, I mean, when we would restore service, maybe it's to a FEMA area where the FEMA guys would come in. So everyone will have to drive there to be able to use their cell phone, whether it be texting or whatnot. So we restored service very quickly for those key areas, but we still haven't fully recovered. I mean, we have to go back and continue to make changes to our fiber, whether it be splicing all the fibers through a particular area, because we couldn't stop and be able to, for instance, if it's a 288 count fiber, we didn't splice all 288s. Every time that we had to restore service there, we would only splice back what was active. So we have to follow back up and do the other because it's, it's long-term recovery. We can't install new customers without having that repaired.
Thank you, Ken. So in the middle of recovery, like while you're still doing it, are you able to also think about future policy or recommendations for PANGAEA that you would implement in case something like this happens again?
Absolutely. Brian mentioned, kind of working with collaborative with Dogwood. We're looking at building more rings around our network. Going through some of the areas that really do not have potential for customers, but it would allow us to bring up one data center relayed from another data center. We're very fortunate, I say fortunate, we probably had at least a dozen portable generators that we were taking around. So our data centers were restored very quickly. We had many of them that were without power for weeks. So we were continually having to, make trips. So we worked with our local providers, propane providers, that were, again, having to cut routes in order to make it to the data centers to be able to refill those tanks. And that just, again, illustrates our public and private partnerships. All those guys are invested because they're local providers and they work with us really well.
And you're their neighbor. You know
Absolutely.
who they are and call on them. Thank you both so much talking about Hurricane Helene recovery. So North Carolina has weathered incredible storms for decades and especially the past few months. We'd like to ask what hazard mitigations you all have for when you anticipate service disruption. Donald, we'll start with you over in Wilson.
So, we, much like everyone else, we experienced a lot of hurricanes. So multiple hurricanes possibly throughout the year. Obviously during the storm, safety's first. High winds, ice accumulation, flood, flash flooding, anything of that nature. We have all of our crews, parked, waiting for the storm to subside. Once it does, we have an order of restoration. We start with public safety and communications because of Greenlight. And what we do at the City of Wilson, we are responsible for the radio communications. So making sure that the towers are up. We have people dispatched to those areas. So if there's an issue at that tower, we have someone on location. We make sure the hospitals and the other emergency medical care facilities are up. Customer service, we have to remain open. We have service level contracts through the hospital and some of these other agencies that need to operate during this time. And then we focus on our residential customers. One of the good things about being a department within the City of Wilson is that we also are in partnership with Wilson Energy and with the water department. Their offices are right down the hall from my office. So we don't do anything as far as Greenlight as an ISP until they are able to get their services up. But as in the last discussion, future-proofing our network because of Greenlight, we've been able to launch an AMI infrastructure, which is automated meter reading. So there are nodes out in the field that can tell us when certain parts of town are down. And if those parts of town are down, we can tell based off the ONTs, which are the optical network terminals on the side of the house that provide Greenlight, if those services are up. So it's kind of like, you know, a home router, and you've got a couple mesh networks off of it and they're hardwired. If you have a TV out in this room, you know, oh, it's just that room. But if you see that your router's offline, your whole house is down. With the way the network is built, it's kind of like a big smart home. We can give them a forecast on, hey, we believe this part of town is down. You can head this way without even making phone calls. When it comes to fiber being on the poles, with the way we have hung our fiber for the most part, when trees do fall down on it, knock on wood, we don't have many outages due to that. And because when Wilson Energy comes through, they don't necessarily cut the fiber like they did initially. Because a lot of times I think when we first launched, they didn't know what the fiber was, and they would go and they would cut it in order to get to their utilities. But what they do now, they'll work around it, call someone out to help move the fiber while they perform their work. So our partnership within the City of Wilson has made working through storms a lot easier than what it was when we initially started. I can say mainly the flooding has been a problem, being able to get to certain areas. But outside of that, the preparation that we put into our pre and post event has been real helpful.
Thank you, Donald. I know that we're at time, but I want to hear from our other panelists for some questions. So if you all can stick around, again, this will be recorded on our website. So Marshall, how does hazard mitigation, what does that look like in your territory?
Yes, really. Yes, not a lot to add. Actually, beyond Donald's comments, of course, you know, our core business is electricity, and you know, of course, you know, we certainly are responsible to ensure that the poles are up, and we can ensure that there's electricity provided back to all of our membership. I mean, of course, we have mutual aid. We collaborate very closely with FEMA. We are a member of NRECA Broadband, which is actually a component, whereas we're trying to work toward how do we manage FEMA support, even on the fiber side. And these are discussions that we're continuing to have now. And there are some infrastructure investments we're making on our system in terms of, you know, like Donald said, in terms of being able to monitor on the fiber side. You know, our network engineering team, certainly they're available. We have our contractors who could be available to us on standby. We actually have a playbook. Fortunately, since we have been in the broadband space, fiber, we have not experienced, but I've been at Roanoke long enough, whereas we've experienced at least 3 major hurricanes that have taken out at least 90% of our system. So we're always in prep mode. And so really, until that time comes, we will certainly make sure that we're managing the playbook to ensure that we can get recovery back to everyone.
Thank you, Marshall. So James, I'm so thankful you're on. You're a statewide partner in CNCs across the state, but which community partners do you typically work with, and what formal, informal type of partnerships do you focus or strengthen?
Well, I think we work with a number of partners across the state, primarily the nonprofit organizations as a nonprofit provider ourselves. So the entire K through 20 system across North Carolina, both public and private institutions, the community colleges system, libraries, cultural centers, nonprofit healthcare, from an MCNC perspective. As it relates to eNCore, our new collaboration with Roanoke Cooperative and 5, you know, we're having a lot of conversations with the EMCs and the TMCs to discuss the ways that we can work together bring efficiencies to their grid operations, but also address the broadband needs of those they serve. But it's not just limited to the EMCs and TMCs. You know, we're looking to others and other providers across the state where the eNCore model can address the issue. So we're really talking to everybody and anybody we can about addressing this issue. As I said before, this is really a shared story. So we're looking for people that can contribute to that story of eliminating that digital divide in North Carolina.
Thank you. So we are a little over time, but if anyone has a question they'd like to ask our panelists in the chat, we can probably take a few more minutes. But George has asked something that I think Brian was able to answer, and we have a connection going there. So thank you, Brian.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk more about that. Basically, there's a big challenge with multi-dwelling units, apartment buildings, getting service to everybody. Low-income housing in particular has been a challenge. The older the building is, the more challenging it can be at times to retrofit cabling. So there's a number of different creative ways that this can be solved. Using internal private LTE, indoor CBRS is one of the ways you can do that. Getting, a lot of folks do use Wi-Fi, but you end up having some capacity and penetration issues. If you put it in the hallways, for example, you might not get service inside the units very well. So it's definitely a big problem. As we move forward with BEAD, it's one of the things I think people should be looking at as far as identifying where their multi-dwelling units are that are particularly at risk, especially HUD-supported housing, public housing, older buildings. It's a good time to take a look at those in advance of BEAD because there are funds in there to get those locations served. And providers are going to have a challenging time. They can generally bring fiber to the building or a point-to-point wireless to the building or cable to the building, but distributing it within the building is a large portion of the cost.
Thank you, Brian. Any other questions? Oh, Marshall, okay. And again, you can send us some questions and we can try to answer them in our follow-up communications if needed. Okay, so one last note before we go. The II Emerging Issues Forum has been rescheduled due to the February snowstorm and will now take place in Raleigh on May 28th this year. The forum will focus on future forward energy, which I think ties into our conversation today about what happened when disasters hit and energy is needed to get connectivity going. And what is needed to strengthen North Carolina's infrastructure to handle population growth expected over the next 25 years. So please register if you can make the new date. That will be included in our follow-up communications as well. And we hope to see you there. So again, thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our speakers. And the recording will be on our website when it is final.
Thank you all.
Thank you.